Alright, students, for this assignment we're going to be studying immigration. So you'll know that the last few assignments that we've done, you've taken civic action by writing a letter to a policymaker. There are many different ways that someone could become civically engaged beyond just writing their representatives. One of those ways is the production of editorial cartoons. We've been using those in our case studies, and you can clearly see how people used cartoons to advocate for or against certain policies, different ways to visually express ideas. So, this assignment, if you want to do something besides writing a letter, you can choose to create an editorial cartoon at the end of the case study. So, just like the letters, you need to make in your cartoon a clear connection between the ideas of the past and the ideas today. After you finish the case study, if you're choosing to do that, go back and consider the cartoons that we used in the case study, but you could also go back to my website to get more inspiration. So we are going to start our assignment on immigration by looking at Thomas Nast cartoon, E Pluribus Unum. Does this sound familiar to anyone? It's Latin, out of many one. You may have seen this on your money. But the full title, E Pluribus Unum, except the Chinese. What was Thomas Nast trying to say in this cartoon? There's a wall here, the Temple of Liberty. What flag is behind the wall? And if that's the case, what is this wall around? What country? And is that country really representing liberty? You have a man at the drawbridge here. This would be a man from China with his traditional Q hairstyle. He's trying to get through his passport into the US. How might that document from the past, from 1882, help us understand a present problem? Anything similar to what's going on today? After you've told me what you think the connection is, generate a question about the document. For our contemporary policy debate, we're going to study Trump's border wall. Yeah, so the border wall has been something that's being debated since 2015 when Trump announced he was running for president. I'm going to have you just look over this timeline, and you're going to use this timeline to fill out your chart. There are many linked articles in here to help you understand the details of the timeline, but you don't have to use any of those. You can just simply use the timeline. We're going to start by recognizing when this all became a thing. June 16th, 2015, Donald Trump announced he was running for president, and in that speech, he put out his ideas about the southern border wall. I'm quoting him here. These are things he said in his speech. I will build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me, and I'll build them very inexpensively. I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will make Mexico pay for that wall, mark my words. He added, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. These are his infamous words. After that speech, it became a theme of his campaign. And you may remember hearing crowds chant, "Build the wall." After he became president in January of 2017, he issued an executive order instructing the Department of Homeland Security to begin the process of constructing the wall. It went on and on and on throughout 2017. Prototypes were built, but the wall itself was not constructed. In 2018, in January, after a full year of being president, he committed to his wall, but still it was unbuilt. Then we make it to January of 2019, and in a fight between Congress, who didn't want to fund the wall, and the president decided to shut down the government and try and force Congress to pay for the wall. That resulted in a shutdown. When that didn't go well, Trump issued a national emergency, which enabled him to use a 1970s law to reallocate military funds to address urgent needs, and he said that he was going to use those to build the wall. Congress was not happy about him using those military funds, so they passed a resolution to stop him, but he vetoed the resolution. This resulted in a lawsuit that makes it all the way to the Supreme Court, which in July of 2019 ruled 5-4 in favor of allowing him to allocate the funds to build the wall. The Supreme Court basically said, as president, he has the right to make decisions that he thinks are related to national security. Most recently, construction of the wall has really slowed down, halted, progress on it halted because of the pandemic. If you are interested in learning the details of any of these, feel free to look at any of the articles. But based on what we just discussed, what's the present situation? What is the wall intended to stop? What does President Trump think the wall needs to be built for? And what is his solution to this problem of immigration? He wants to build a... Right. Then look back at his speech and tell me, what are the reasons that President Trump and his supporters want to build the wall? The timeline doesn't say much about why people opposed it, except for what Congress was doing. Why is it that you have heard some people oppose the building of the wall? After you've answered both of these, tell me, with what you know right now, do you support or oppose President Trump's border wall? And then for some extra credit, if you can create your own solution to this policy problem of immigration, please do so there. Part 2, we're going to start our case study. We're going to study House Resolution 5804. What would House Resolution 5804 do? It said, in the opinion of the U.S. government, the coming of Chinese laborers endangers this country. Therefore, it is illegal for Chinese laborers to come into the United States for the next 10 years. This is a really important line. This is the basics of the bill. We need to make sure that we point out it says Chinese laborers, not Chinese people. Lots of students want to just jump to the conclusion that it makes illegal for all Chinese people to come to America. That's not quite true. It just targets specifically Chinese who is a laborer. All right, here's the details. The owner of any ship who brings to the United States any Chinese laborer is guilty of a misdemeanor. They shall be punished by a fine of not more than $500 for each Chinese laborer on their ship, and possibly also imprisoned for up to 1 year. Every ship whose owner violates this law may be taken from the owner and kept by the United States government. Think about this. If these ship captains and boat owners are bringing over the Chinese and getting paid for it, nothing's going to stop them from doing it, even if the Chinese are not allowed to enter the country, because there's money to be made. But if you were a boat owner, would you reconsider bringing Chinese over illegally if it was going to cost you $500 per head, possibly lead to you getting imprisoned, and lead to your boat being taken away from you? People might reconsider it. Further, the bill said, no Chinese person shall be permitted to enter the United States by land without having a document allowing them to legally stay in America. Any Chinese person found unlawfully within the United States shall be removed from the country by direction of the President of the United States. So basically, this says what? If you are a Chinese person living in America, you have to have your papers. If you don't have them, you get deported. All right, last part. No state, court, or court of the United States are allowed to give Chinese people citizenship, and all laws in conflict with this act are now repealed. This is also important. What would this do? This bill would deny Chinese people the right to become what? Right, take a moment, summarize what House Resolution 5804 would do. Then we'll move on to historic context. Let's talk about what was going on. In the 1800s, many Chinese immigrated to America from China. They came to mine during the gold rush and worked building the Transcontinental Railroad. One railroad went to China and recruited 15,000 Chinese workers. It's easy to understand why, during the gold rush, when Americans were rushing to the West Coast, it would make sense for people from all over the rest of the world to also go to California. Who doesn't like gold? And who doesn't want to strike it rich? So it's understandable that Chinese would come to work in the mines. How do you think this made Americans feel? An American company goes to a foreign country and recruits 15,000 workers. If there are 15,000 Chinese workers on the railroad, does that mean there were 15,000 Americans who didn't get employed to work on those railroads? This leads to an anti-Chinese movement in the 1870s. In 1876, both the Democratic and Republican political platforms made anti-Chinese statements. Remember that a political platform are the issues the political party lays out and says, these are our objectives, these are our beliefs. So if both of the major political parties make statements against the Chinese, does that show that the idea was growing in America? In 1876, the Democratic platform condemned the coolie trade. Coolie was a derogatory term used for Chinese people, and the incursions of a race not sprung from the same great parent stock as European Americans. The 1876 Republican platform asked Congress to investigate the effects of immigration and importation of Mongolians on the moral and material interests of the country. Here's what's interesting. In 1877, the Working Men's Party is established in San Francisco. It was led by a man named Dennis Kearney, who was made famous for his The Chinese Must Go speeches. We need to understand that a whole political party, a whole political movement, was based on this opposition to Chinese immigration. In 1879, Congress passed a bill limiting Chinese immigration, but President Hayes vetoed the bill, saying it violated the Burlingame Treaty with China. In 1882, Congress passed another bill limiting Chinese immigration. That bill was vetoed by President Arthur, who said the bill's 20-year ban on Chinese immigration was not practical and therefore a violation of the Angel Treaty. So you need to know that on the national level, 2 different times presidents prevented a law going into effect that would have restricted Chinese immigration. One problem with all of this is that the consequences were not just political. The people who disliked the Chinese also acted out on that anger. Anti-Chinese feelings also led to anti-Chinese violence. Examples of anti-Chinese violence include 18 Chinese people killed in Los Angeles in 1871 and 6 Chinese people killed in Chico, California in 1877. 1882, Senator Page introduced House Resolution 5804. another bill restricting Chinese immigration. We're going to study the case. The case study is related to Senator Page's bill. So looking at over all of the historic context, what do we really need to know that would cause a bill debating restricting Chinese workers from coming to America to be debated? So evidently, who was coming to America in large numbers? Why were they coming to America? And how did that make Americans feel? How were some Americans reacting to the arrival of these foreigners? In section 1, we're going to try and find out why people think immigration policy should restrict the right to immigrate to America. What does restrict mean? If you're restricting something, you're holding back, you're preventing it from growing. 1882, a Republican from California named Horace F. Page gave a speech on Chinese immigration. As you read, highlight and change the color of important text to red. Look for things that he says that really identify reasons that people oppose Chinese immigrating to America. Mr. Page said, "Mr. Speaker, I will not dignify the Chinese coming here by the title of immigration, but will call it what it is in reality, an invasion. The Empire of China contains 400 million people. That empire can overrun us and drive us out. This is not a fight in which the fittest survives. It is a question of whether we can maintain our nationality." These first two paragraphs, what is Page saying is going to happen? Are the Chinese just going to come here? Or is it going to be more dramatic than that? Language like this: overrun us and drive us out. What are his reasons in the first two paragraphs for opposing Chinese immigration? He went on to say, "Mr. Speaker, we are opposed to all Chinese immigration because, as I have said before, they are a class we do not believe to be desirable. We do not believe their coming here is beneficial to us. It is not a question into which politics should enter, but the interests and the welfare of all our people. The people of this country, who are affected by this class of immigration, are in favor of restricting this Chinese immigration, excepting the men who are profiting by their coming." In these two paragraphs, what reasons is he giving for wanting to prevent Chinese to come here? He doesn't describe them as desirable. He doesn't think them coming here is beneficial. What does this mean? If something is beneficial, it's good for you. How does he feel about the Chinese immigration? Then says, "This was the land of the free, the home of the brave, and the asylum of the downtrodden and oppressed of all nationalities. Mr. Speaker, it is a home of the downtrodden and the oppressed, but it is not the home for millions of coolie slaves and serfs." So he's saying he's not against all immigration. He's just not for the immigration of people he considers slaves. "The Chinese have driven from our manufacturing industries nearly all of the skilled artisans of our own race. It is impossible for any American born or any foreign born citizen of the United States who has a family to support to engage in competition with this sort of labor successfully." What's he saying in this paragraph? What's happening to American workers? And who does he blame that on? "The Chinaman has no children to take care of, no wife to clothe and support. He has none of the responsibilities of citizenship thrown upon him. He cares nothing for your institutions. He laughs at us when we talk of our great country, talk about our great country? How does he describe the Chinese and their attitude towards America, even when they're in America? In all their history, they have never shown they were capable of becoming citizens of this country. They cannot assimilate with us and have no desire to do so. So I hope that on tomorrow, when this bill shall be voted on, we shall place upon the statute book a law which will protect the labor of this country from the influx of Chinese immigration. Who does he want to protect? After you have changed important text to red, you need to go to green and complete this sentence. Look at what you changed to red and explain that in your own words. After you've done so, you need to explain how that idea from the past, from back in 1882, is related to immigration policy being debated today, in 2020. Okay, for our second piece of evidence, you're again going to take the evidence that you think differs from what you focused on in the above evidence. If in the document above you focused on the idea of the Chinese taking over our country, you're going to use Thomas Nast, The Martyrdom of St. Crispin. That cartoon is right here. Who is this man here? That would be St. Crispin. St. Crispin is the patron saint of cobblers, people who make shoes. What's about to happen to the American worker here? Who are these people behind him? What are they holding? What's the main idea of that cartoon? And how is that related to today's debate? If you focused in the above speech on the idea of the Chinese stealing American jobs, you're going to use George F. Keller's A Statue for Our Harbor. That would be this cartoon. A Statue for Our Harbor. The Wasp was a San Francisco magazine. So our harbor would be the West Coast, which is where a lot of the Chinese were arriving. Think geographically, why would the Chinese be arriving in California? How does this statue show opposition to Chinese immigration? This being a Chinese man, what is projecting from his head? What is the rays of light? Do any of those sound like things we want in America? If we were to look at the boats, all of these boats arriving from China, what's happening to our country? What are these animals that are crawling around on the pedestal? So for either of those cartoons, make sure you summarize the main idea and then you tell me how those ideas are related to immigration being debated today. Section 2. We now need to find why people believe immigration policy should not restrict the right to immigrate to America. We're going to read Frederick Douglass's speech. This was actually an essay that was written by Frederick Douglass in 1869 titled Our Composite Nationality. We've used Frederick Douglass for a number of different assignments. Remember that he was a leader of the abolitionist movement, had been born into slavery, but escaped from it, and worked to improve America. 1869, after slavery has ended, what other issues is Frederick Douglass politically becoming involved in? See if he can give us any reasons why we should not restrict immigration. Frederick Douglass wrote, "Other nations have had their day of greatness and glory. We are yet to have our day, and that day is coming. It is bright and full of promise." What kind of reasons do you think Frederick Douglass does not think that our country has been great or glorious? What did our country just end the time that Frederick Douglass was alive? But he does seem optimistic. He wrote, "The Chinese will come, and we may expect them in very large numbers. Do you ask if I would favor such immigration? I answer, I would. Would you have them naturalized and have them invested with all the rights of American citizenship? I would. I submit that this question of Chinese immigration should be settled upon higher principles of human rights. They are eternal, universal, and indestructible." Why is he talking about human rights when we're talking about immigration? Let's find out. He said, "Among these is the right of locomotion, the right of migration, the right which belongs to no particular race, but belongs to all alike. It is the right you assert by staying here, and your fathers asserted by coming here. It is this great right that I assert for the Chinese, and all other varieties of men equally with yourselves, now and forever. I know of no rights of race superior to the rights of humanity, and when there is a supposed conflict between human and national rights, it is safe to go with the side of humanity." In this paragraph, he talks about this idea, this right you assert by staying here, and your fathers asserted by coming here. Is he pointing out that everyone in America at this time, especially those opposed to Chinese immigration, are themselves only here because of immigration? So if immigration is good for them or good for their ancestors, why is it not good enough for the Chinese? He goes on to say, "I reject the theory by which the blue eyed and light haired races of America would limit migratory rights, or any other essential human rights, to themselves, and which would make them the owners of this great continent to the exclusion of all other races of men." So, who is he saying does not own, quote, quote, the country? "I want a home here not only for the Negro, the mulatto, and the Latin races, but I want the Asiatic to find a home here in the United States and feel at home here, both for his sake and for ours. A liberal and brotherly welcome to all who are likely to come to the United States is the only wise policy which this nation can adopt. Though they come as the waves come, we shall be all the stronger if we receive them as friends and give them a reason for loving our country and our institutions." So, what is he saying about the Chinese coming here? Unlike Horace Page, who thought it was bad for the country, what does Frederick Douglass think these immigrants will do? He wrote, "We should welcome to our ample continent all peoples, and as fast as they learn our language and comprehend the duties of citizenship, we should incorporate them into the American body politic. The outspread wings of the American eagle are broad enough to shelter all who are likely to come. We shall mold them all into Americans. All shall here bow to the same law, speak the same language, support the same government, enjoy the same liberty, vibrate with the same national enthusiasm, and seek the same national ends." What's it mean to mold something? If you're molding something, you're shaping it. So he's saying the Chinese will come here, and what will we turn them into? And once they've become American, what will everything look like? Seek the same national ends. If they become American and they believe in these American ideas, will they work to help America? Isn't that the same national ends? After you have highlighted and summarized a quote, try and think about how that specific quote may be related to some things people say today when talking about the border wall. Is anything that Frederick Douglass said in opposition to restricting immigration from China related to something someone might say in reaction to restricting immigration through the use of a border wall? Make that connection here. All right, and for the image, I could not decide which one to pick. So I think as a group, we should explore all the different cartoons here, and you pick one for us to work on. So choose any one that you like, copy and paste it to the Google document. Make sure you summarize the main ideas and you make a connection between the two debates. If you want help picking one of the cartoons, let me know and I'll try my best to help you narrow down choices. After you have looked at both sides of the case study, found why people opposed restricting Chinese immigration and why people supported it, we need to talk about the choices and consequences. Remember that you find that at the bottom of the webpage. So the results of this specific debate on April 17th, 1882, 5 days after being introduced by Horace F. Page, House Resolution 5804 was passed by the House of Representatives. Only 37 voted against it, 202 voted for it. It was voted on by April 28th by the Senate, and 3 days later, it became law when President Chester A. Arthur signed it into law. It's now known as the Chinese Exclusion Act. Think of the word exclusion. What's it mean to exclude somebody? You leave them out? Who did the Exclusion Act leave out of America? Here's your numbers on the specific voting. But we now need to know what the consequences of the Chinese Exclusion Act are. So think back to why they would make this choice. If you are an American politician, which group of people are you trying to satisfy the demands of? The voters, right? If people in America are in favor of restricting immigration because they think that immigration hurts them, would it be a bad idea for a politician to not restrict the immigration? As you learn from the historic context, the anti-Chinese movement had grown quite large in America, large enough to support an entire political party. So is the reason that they chose to restrict Chinese immigration just because that's what the American voters wanted them to do? Why would they not be worried about making Chinese people unhappy with this or insulting the Chinese? Could the Chinese vote in America? So, what did their opinion matter? What were the consequences of this policy decision? So, this was the first immigration law that targeted a specific ethnic group. This is one of the very first restrictive immigration policies that we have. And keep in mind that that's 1882. In addition to the ban on Chinese workers who wanted to come to America, the act also impacted the Chinese already living in the United States. Any Chinese who wanted to leave the United States had to get a certificate that would allow them to re-enter before they left. The act also denied Chinese immigrants the ability to become a U.S. citizen. So just imagine you had been a Chinese person living in America, or a person born of Chinese descent living in America, and now it makes it harder for you to visit the country where you are from, and it makes it impossible to become a citizen of the country where you now live. How do you think that made Chinese people feel, those who lived in America? In the decades following the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, lawmakers made amendments to the act in 1884, making it more difficult for immigrants to leave and return. They made it apply to all Chinese people, not just those from specifically China. 1888, the Scott Act, added to the Chinese Exclusion Act, made it illegal for Chinese immigrants to enter the United States if they had left. 1892, the Geary Act extended the act for another 10 years. When the act was extended again in 1902, it required all Chinese people living in America to register with the government and get a certificate showing they were legally living in America. If they did not get a certificate, they could be deported. So at this point, the Chinese Americans will have to carry around papers showing that they were legally in America. It should be noted, however, the Chinese who wanted to come to America and the Chinese who already lived in America did not just accept the act, and its amendments. Immigrants who were detained, entry, filed petitions, and Chinese Americans organized opposition to the law. One organization called the Chinese Equal Rights League. Opposition was done in different ways. Many of the Chinese Americans who were required to register with the government refused to do so, were challenged in court. One of those cases, Chechen Ping v. United States, made it to the Supreme Court. The court's ruling declared that the power to exclude foreigners is a power every government has. This meant, in the opinion of the Supreme Court, it is constitutional to pass a policy that bans groups of people, from coming to the United States. So these Chinese Americans thought it was un American and illegal to restrict immigration in that way, but the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of it. The limits placed on immigration from China as a result of the Chinese exclusion ban was official government policy until 1943. It's interesting why it ended. The act was repealed in 1943 because the United States relied on China as an ally during World War II. Remember that we were fighting against the Japanese, and the Chinese were our ally in that fight. Imagine we are trying to work and cooperate with the Chinese to defeat the Japanese, and we're arguing for America as a country of liberty to be fighting this war against the Japanese. Do you think the Chinese were a little hurt by our past relationship? In 2011, the Senate, and in 2012, the House of Representatives both formally passed resolutions expressing regret for their role in the creation of the Chinese Exclusion Act, a government policy that denied Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans basic rights because of their ethnicity. We do need to credit the Chinese Equal Rights League with being one of the first civil rights organizations in the United States. Another sad consequence of the Chinese Exclusion Act and the anti Chinese movement was the anti Chinese violence that occurred. Two examples include the Rock Spring Massacre in 1885, where 28 Chinese people were killed in Wyoming, and the Hells Canyon Massacre in 1887, where 34 Chinese were killed in California. Do these seem like things that America should be proud of? The fact that people in America were killed just because of their ethnicity, the way they appeared? furthermore, that if the government takes steps to exclude people, does that make those people then others? If you're living in America and your government says things or does things that make another group of people seem less than you, does that maybe justify some people in some people's minds treating those people differently? The US government didn't officially come out and say you have the right to kill Chinese people, but did the actions of the American government in any way maybe inflame Americans' feeling towards the Chinese? Made a mistake. Hell's Canyon is in Oregon. All right, let's compare and contrast the two debates. What is similar between the two policy debates? Overall, we're talking about what? Restricting immigration? And what's more specific about it, it's immigration that is targeting a specific group of people. In the past, who are we restricting immigration of? And today, who are we restricting immigration of? All right, now it's time to create your policy advice. Remember that you have the option this time to make editorial cartoons instead of writing a letter. But you still need to make sure that your cartoons incorporate ideas from both the past and present debates. If you have questions finishing the assignment, please let me know.